It's been a little more than a week since a gunman killed 8 people at 3 different massage spas in the metro Atlanta area. Within that week, another shooting occurred, this one in Boulder, Colorado. The shooter murdering 10 people at a supermarket, including 1 police officer. Many questions still remain about the Atlanta shooting. 7 of the victims were women, 6 of Asian descent, leading many to believe that it was a hate crime. The suspect, meanwhile, denies race was a motive, saying instead he attacked the spas to, quote, eliminate temptation for a diagnosed sex addiction. Investigators say that may or may not be true, but it's just too early to tell.
So we cannot make that determination at this moment. Again, we are very early in this investigation. Even though we've made an arrest, there's still a lot more work to be done.
There's no evidence that any of the victims engaged in sex works at the spas, so why are these individuals who were so tragically murdered now entangled in a curious narrative that sits at the intersection of racism and misogyny? Marita Etcubanez joins us to talk about this subject. Marita is the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and she joins us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us today.
Thank you.
So let's talk, first of all, about AAJC, the organization, and its mission. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yes, so Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC's mission is to advance civil and human rights for Asian Americans and to build and promote a fair and equitable society for all. So we are located in Washington, D.C., and we focus on federal policy advocacy on issues impacting the Asian American community.
Mm-hmm. And you're also an attorney as well, are you not?
I am, yes.
Yeah. You know, it's been a tough couple of weeks, particularly for the Asian community with last week's shooting of 8 people, shooting and killing of 8 people, 6 of those Asian American women. What was your first reaction when you saw that? Was it a surprise to you, like it was to many of us, or not so much?
I was horrified, but not surprised. Many of us have been sounding the alarm about the increased hate and harassment that Asian American communities have been facing in connection with the pandemic, since unfortunately many people have pinned blame for COVID-19 on Asian Americans. And we have received greater numbers of reports of the harassment and the discrimination that our community has been experiencing over the past year plus connected with the pandemic. And so as much as I would, I was not surprised to hear about what happened. Like I said, horrified, but not surprised.
We're seeing a number that was just recently published, over 3,500 hate incidents between March 2020 and February of this year. That's according to the organization Stop AAIP Hate. That's about 1,000 incidents up from the previous year. You just mentioned some of the language and, I guess, for lack of a better description, policy from the previous administration, the Trump administration, helping to ramp this up a bit. Is that the only reason, or is this just a rise you've been seeing over a number of years in hate crimes?
The problematic political rhetoric is certainly not the only reason behind this, but it can't have helped matters, right? To have our former president and other elected officials using racist terminology, and even when people attempted to call them on it, they were not at all apologetic, and if anything, doubled down and continued to use this language. So we see that as contributing to a climate where people felt that, if anything, the acting on racist sentiment was condoned by, even our former president. So that did not help matters, but certainly that's not the only cause. For a lot of people that don't know about the history of Asian Americans in this country, we have faced discrimination from the beginning. A prominent example, Chinese people were recruited to come to the United States as a source of labor. And there was anti-Chinese sentiment was high in the West. During the 1800s, there were any number of examples where Chinese people were beaten, driven out of towns, and even killed. And this sort of sentiment was codified into law with the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, one of the first pieces of restrictive immigration legislation, but that explicitly barred people from an entire country from immigrating to the United States.
With this shooting, of course, there's a pardon me, a new wrinkle that has been thrown into the mix with the introduction of the possibility, of course, and this comes from testimony, or at least what police have been able to get from the alleged shooter, that he had a sexual deviancy that caused him to go to these massage parlors and kill people. Again, as we said before, at least six were Asian Americans. So it was raised, the possibility was raised that this was a hate crime based on this sexual misogynist thing that he had in his mind through his mental illness, and interacting with the shooting itself, resulting in people calling this a hate crime based on the fact that six Asian women were killed. Can you explain that for the viewer? We've had a lot of questions from people about that and how those things intersect to create a hate crime. How do you best explain that for people who are not who are having trouble understanding that?
Yes. Well, I think one of the challenges with classifying and pursuing something as a hate crime is that, well, one, there has to be an underlying crime, which I think it's clear that there was in this case. But the prosecution also has to prove that it was driven by an impermissible motive, right? That it was motivated by bias based on one's personal characteristic, whether that's race, gender, religion, something like that. And I think there is this desire, that's not the right word, but people want to be able to bound things neatly in one box. This was clearly based on race. This was clearly based on gender. And in this case, we have a confluence of the two, right? Which I think doesn't mean that the act was not motivated by bias, but perhaps the intersection of race and gender is making it difficult for people to understand.
Here's one of the questions that somebody brought up when to address just exactly what you said. It said, well, yeah, it's based on race, based on gender. Let's take one at a time. If it were, let's say based on race. Let's say, for example, the predominant number of people who are working in any one particular massage salon were black women. Then would we be talking about a hate crime against black women? You see?
I think it could be. I mean, really what I think has been most troubling about all of this was the fact that some of the initial law enforcement response seemed to embrace the narrative that the accused has put forth.
Yeah.
Right? And seemingly dismissed at the jump that this could possibly be a hate crime. And I think that's where a lot of the concern is coming from. Like, you're at the beginning of all of this. It seems clear to many people that since 6 Asian women were among those murdered, that you have to, at minimum, explore the motivations here and see if it could be a hate crime and not just dismiss that out of hand.
And to be fair, I mean, the police have said so far that they haven't gathered enough information. They haven't talked to enough sources to come to a conclusion on the motives. So they're willing to say at least that, yeah, there's the possibility that this, in fact, is a hate crime, but they just haven't come to that conclusion yet. Is that fair enough? Is that fair?
I mean, that's progress over where they started with their initial response.
Yeah. As we mentioned earlier, you're an attorney. How difficult is it to prosecute hate crimes?
So I have never practiced criminal law, so I can't speak to that from personal experience. But I would say that, as an attorney, when you're pursuing claims, you want to lead with your strongest claim and the one that you know you're most likely to win, right? So pursuing the crime, murder, I think is fairly straightforward here. And I can understand why there might be a reluctance to delve into charges that would require one to also prove motive.
Mhm.
But I think it would be better to get the perspective of a seasoned prosecutor or defense attorney to get into the specifics of all of that.
Agreed, and understood. And thank you for your thoughts as best you could from your perspective as an attorney. But again, I bring that up because I've heard from other attorneys who have had some experience in that area and read what some of them have written. And to a man and woman, they all claim that prosecuting these hate crimes for any group, and we've certainly seen a lot of them go out the door with hate crimes prosecuted against African Americans. Very hard to prosecute, and very hard to bring to a successful conclusion. So I think that's part of what the investigators may be concerned about in their approach to trying to get as much information and make sure that they have all information before they come to some conclusion on the motive of the criminal who was charged with this. Where do we go from here? Because again, easy to say, this has been going on for some time. It's been undercut, of course, by other concerns, by other groups who have been the targets of racial hatred in this country. But the Asian American community can count themselves within that. It's just been in the background and nobody's been talking about it until now. Now that we're aware of it, now that other people are aware of it, now that other people have become re-aware of it, where do we go from here? How do we try to correct this? Is it the same as what we're trying to do with other groups, or is there's something different that needs to be done here?
I think there's a lot of common cause with what other groups are calling for. We are following the lead of our sibling organization, Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. They are the ones doing the work on the ground, connecting with the families of the victims, working with the broader community. And they have put out statements saying that, they are calling for greater investment in community safety, trying to listen to what the community needs and respond accordingly, invest in systems that will address the root causes of racism and discrimination so that we are building systems that can more effectively deal with problems. And I think a lot of what the current calls for are building on what advocates from the Black Lives Matter movement have been calling for. Alternatives to increased law enforcement, alternatives to prosecution and incarceration, because we want to be mindful that systems that we build are not going to further harm Black and Brown communities and others that are disproportionately impacted by the way things are built now.
Mm-hmm. What about the notion that we just, and we've had this discussion here, not with you, of course, but we've had this discussion here or now with other people, and it's been suggested that much of the problem revolves around our inability to get to know one another in this country. There are, the U.S. is kind of, we're a little unique in the world order, in the sense that we're not a nation of, not a homogeneous nation of people who are all of one culture or all of one background, nationality. And, but we span the globe for the most part, to use a cliched phrase. And we're people from all over, but we, as human nature would have it, we all like to stay in our own little groups. It's comfortable. There's nothing wrong with that, I suppose. We all tend to relate to people who have the same nationality, same culture, we eat the same food, we talk the same language, and that's all good. But when we're all in the same country, if we don't get a chance to know each other and to interact with one another in a way that tears away all these myths, that answers questions, it was concluded that we're just never going to get over this problem. How close is that, do you think, to a solution?
I think certainly we can all be doing more to reach out beyond our comfort zone, as you identified, right? And start having these conversations with other people and people from communities that we might not typically have had much interaction with, right? I think trying to build bridges at the interpersonal level is very important, but also across organizations. Like my organization, coalitional work is part of our DNA. I mean, we represent a relatively small population in the United States, and we recognize the power in numbers. We work very closely with other civil rights organizations, and I have to say that the work there and the solidarity that has been expressed from our partner civil rights organizations is really meaningful. And I think that there's a lot we can learn there at the interpersonal level, right? Who be there for one another, to stand up not only when it's your own community that's impacted, but to also stand up and support other communities when they're impacted. I think that is true across organizations and also, at the people-to-people level.
The question that somebody else had the other day raised or reminded me of something that used to go on in the Black community. In fact, there was a series at one point, and it was kind of tongue in cheek, but it had a serious mission as well. It was called Ask a Black Man or Ask a Black Woman. They expanded it to Ask a Lesbian or Ask a Gay Man. The idea was, if you are on the other side of that fence and you're curious about something that you do not know about these other people because you didn't grow up with them, your parents had no friends that were with that group, then go ahead and ask that question, no matter how uncomfortable you think it may be. And this person will answer the question as best they can without any judgment, without any animosity towards you, and try and clear up your ignorance. I was reminded of this again because I don't know if you saw this, so it was an op-ed piece, I believe, in the New York Times, just in the last couple of days, that talked about one of the things that is really offensive, and not just to Asian people, but I've seen this in other groups as well, is the question of, where are you from? You're laughing because I think you've been asked that question before. Yes. What is wrong with that question, and how best can a person who is honestly trying to ask that question just to clear up some ignorance, how best can that person ask that question? But first of all, take the first part. What's wrong with the question that begins? Because most people don't even think there's anything wrong with that question. How can they better ask that question going forward?
Understood. I think what's offensive about the question is the implication that you're not from here, that you're not American. And I think it's fair to have curiosity about my ethnicity, where my family might be from, but ask me that. Don't ask where I'm from and doubt it when I say I'm from Washington, D.C.
I'm an American, for God's sakes.
Right. So I think I understand the curiosity. It's the way that the question is asked and what it implies. And I wasn't aware of the Ask a Black Man. I think that's a fascinating strategy. And I've seen that mirrored by, I believe, like our colleagues in the Muslim community and the Sikh community, right? Because they want people to better understand them and dispel a lot of misconceptions and misunderstanding. But I think for that to work, it has to be a safe space, and both sides have to agree to enter into that conversation, right? Because I think another thing that a lot of people of color and people from minority communities will understand is just, we bear a lot of burdens, and often, we shouldn't also have to be the ones to teach others all the time why what they're doing is wrong. I'm happy to do that in certain moments, but again, sort of have to have an agreement that we are going to do that, because a lot of times the opportunity for that teachable moment is one when I'm just not, I don't want to deal with it in the moment, or it's coming out because of something problematic or racist that someone said. And it takes a tremendous amount of patience and fortitude to then enter that in a gentle way and use it as a teachable moment, as opposed to just reacting with anger.
No, and I understand. And again, my heart goes out to the community because, and I've talked with the other folks, other Black folks, African American folks, and it's interesting because we found ourselves shaking our heads, going, "Yep, okay, yep, that's familiar. We've seen that before. Maybe."
Exactly.
Yeah, can we offer some advice on where we've been and where we're still trying to go? So again, that strategy is it's not for everyone. You're absolutely right. To be able to answer that question with some grace in the moment is a case by case basis. Not everyone can do it. Personally, I found that I can. I've never had a problem with that, and I actually have some friends who are white who I've had for years who started out in that little space. Like, well, can I touch your hair? Or why does it do that? Why is it curly? Why is mine not? And get your hands off my hair. What? And so yeah, that becomes offensive. But as you grow older, you tend to think, well, maybe that's just an honest question that needs some answering. And if you're going to ask me, okay, I'll go ahead and answer it. But you're right. That's not everyone who can do that. Do we leave the answers to that question to other organizations, groups designated to do that, or is the onus purely on the person who asked the question? You go find the answer.
I mean, obviously that's not satisfactory either. And I think a lot of us can do this, right? You just I think it's and agreeing to enter into the conversation and with an agreement on what the expectations are on both sides, right? Because I do think it requires a specific mindset. Like you said, no judgment. That's hard.
Yeah.
So I think lots of people can do this within their circles, right, of family and friends, and perhaps consider going larger. But I think it's not the answer to everything, but at an interpersonal level, over the past year or more, my organization has partnered with a group called Hollaback, and they were created to take on street harassment. They approached us early on in the pandemic and asked if we would be interested in taking their harassment training and adapting it to talk about the Asian American context in this particular moment. So we said yes, because we thought this could be a valuable tool for folks. We very quickly workshopped the training, and we started offering it last April. And it's their bystander intervention training, which we're now doing bystander intervention to address anti-Asian harassment. And we are close to training 25,000 people.
Wow.
And demand for the training has just skyrocketed. I think people are very eager to be able to do something. So we talked through some tactics that really anyone can use to intervene should they see or experience harassment. But I raise this now because one of the tools we talk about is a spectrum of disrespect. So we talk about, the more egregious hate crimes, the things that people typically see in the news, but then a range of other behaviors that are objectionable, even down to microaggressions, right? Like the where are you from? Can I touch your hair? And we talk about how it's important to intervene in perhaps the less serious moments, to have those teachable moments as a way of building a society where it's clear that disrespect, harassment, discrimination are not acceptable.
Absolutely. One last question. Has this, well, not at this point, well, let me hold that for a second, but prior to last week, has this been, in your opinion, a very underreported issue?
I feel like mainstream media has been paying more attention over the past year, and certainly things ramped up once these accounts of violent attacks on Asian elders were coming to light, and there was video footage of, our frail parents and grandparents being knocked down in the street. I feel like more attention is being paid, but I would hope that the focus of this moment doesn't dissipate quickly, right? Yeah. Because there's a lot that we still need to grapple with and unpack, and I just hope we don't, brush our hands and move on.
I am hoping as well, because I ask that question because, again, as we record this, there's been a new shooting, 10 people as far as we know in the Colorado area, and that's been within a week. And you can see how, and I won't get off into a tangent here about the news cycle, but as the news cycle goes, they sometimes will go after the shiny keys, and I fear that this issue will get pushed back a little. But then again, maybe not, because they're both tragic shooting incidences. Actually, killings, mass killings. There's two differences between, as you probably know, difference between mass shootings and mass killings. This is a mass killing. That was a mass killing. I think that it's bringing to light the issue of gun violence and gun reform again, along with raising the issue of violence and hate against the Asian community. So hopefully this time it will lead to something productive. Thank you.
I hope so too.
Yeah, we all hope so. Thank you very much for your thoughts and your insights, Marita Etcubanez. Thank you for joining us here on Now Today.
Thank you.
And thank you for being there this week. If you like what you're seeing, please tell your friends. And in the meantime, be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and then be right back here next week, Thursday, for another edition of Now. Till then, take care. Peace.